Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast, brought to you by Mayo Clinic. I'm your host, Dr. Andrea Tooley.
And I'm Dr. Eric Bothan. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest in ophthalmology, medicine, and more. In today's episode, we get to sit down with Ruth Williams again, past president of the AAO and current medical editor of iNet magazine. We will talk to her about private equity and all things iNet.
Dr. Ruth Williams is a glaucoma specialist and nationally and internationally recognized leader in ophthalmology. Dr. Williams is a president emeritus of the Wheaton Eye Clinic in Illinois, one of the largest multi-specialty group practices in the Midwest. She's a past AAO president and the current chief medical editor of iNet magazine. Welcome, Dr. Williams.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, we're so happy to have you here as a return guest. We had you a few years ago when you were here speaking at Mayo, and we had you in the studio, but we're doing virtual today. You're just so phenomenal. We had to bring you back for a repeat episode.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be with you, and it's just delightful to have a conversation again.
Today we had a couple topics we thought we'd step into, and one is your role in iNet, and the other is about private equity. And with your past leadership position at the Wheaton Eye Clinic, we're excited to talk about that topic. But why don't we start with iNet? We all appreciate the social media and different platforms to promote eye care services and practice. How did you get into that space and become the editor in that position?
David Park invited me to be the editor of iNet magazine. Actually, there was a process. There was a search committee, but it was really his idea for me to do this, and I was really stunned. So, like is often the case, someone asks you to do a job, and you say, "Oh, I think I could do that." And the moral of that story is, or the nugget of truth is when someone asks you to do something, say yes.
I love that sentiment. I encourage that to lots of people. We're gearing up for Mid-Year Forum, and I think that's such a perfect example of say yes when people ask you to do things. iNet is such an interesting publication because it's not completely a peer-reviewed academic journal. It's not the same as the Blue Journal or Ophthalmology, but it's not completely just a lighthearted magazine. It's kind of both, and it bridges both areas. And I feel like it's really come on the scene even more since you've been editor with your monthly columns that everyone looks forward to. It's like this job was created for you, kind of as you alluded to with Dr. Park. So give us a glimpse of like what is iNet and how do you view it as the editor?
Well, my favorite way of describing iNet is that it's a cross between the Blue Journal and the New York Times. And what I mean by that is that we want to present vetted, accurate, consistent information that's consistent with the PPPs and the RCTs, but we also want it to be timely. And from my perspective, the most important thing about iNet is it's what we're doing day to day. So I want the stories to be the things you're going to see in the clinic or the procedures you're going to be performing or the things that you need to learn to be a better physician. I love it. The other thing is that iNet has been an evolution. This is my 10th year, I think, and it's changed as we've gone along. And I think when we do a job for a long time, we bring our personality and skill to it. So so I think the team together has shaped the kind of iNet it is today. I love the magazine. I think it's where people are.
Share with us, because you obviously have a full spectrum of articles and topics being tapped into that I think as ophthalmologists we can connect with or learn from as a source. Share with us one or two examples in the last year, or maybe two, that stood out for you that really captured sentiment or feedback that surprised you. Like a topic that just you look back and go, wow, I didn't realize how well those articles would have been received. Give us an example about two or three.
Well, actually, there's a stunning example that just happened in November. So something had been percolating in the back of my mind for a long time. I had gone to dinner with some friends and all ophthalmologists, and there was a mid-career ophthalmologist there, one of the most respected cataract surgeons that I know, and probably one of the busiest cataract surgeon in his state. And he just made this casual offhand comment. He goes, yeah, I have trouble sleeping the night before surgery. And I was stunned because I thought, wait, you? Really? You're kidding me. And that just kind of did a little circle in my head for a long time. And I decided as an iNet project to learn more about it. So I ended up interviewing lots of people anonymously and then wrote an editorial about, what people are really saying about how stressful cataract surgery is. And that it's cataract surgery, not cornea surgery, not retina surgery. It's cataract surgery and why that is. So I wrote this article, and I had more response to that article than anything I've ever written. So last time I looked, there were almost 10,000 page views. And that doesn't even, count the people who read it in print. So, and then I got emails and phone calls from people who said, oh yeah, this is my experience. So that, the medium of iNet allowed us to almost accidentally tap into something that's a very big issue in our community and talk about it more openly.
That's wonderful. It's interesting you say that, because just this week I was speaking to a colleague that is partially retired, not doing intraocular surgery anymore, and just loves the retirement for most of his practice. But the part that really spoke to comfort, joy, less stress the most was that they weren't doing cataract surgery. They could still do all the other types of medical care and ophthalmology, but even though this person was, like you're saying, a really good cataract surgeon in retirement, it was sort of this yoke of tension about post-operative risks and management that they so appreciated. So it's interesting that tapped a pulse that you were unaware of.
It's really amazing. And to think about, what that means for our lives and our well-being, and really to be more transparent about it. Because if we realize we're, most of us or many of us carry that together, it normalizes it. And a lot of people told me, well, I thought I was the only one. And also to talk about it openly instead of bragging, oh, I do an 8-minute cataract surgery. Aren't I great? But to talk about the burden we carry so that, the payers and the public learn that what we do is really, really difficult and takes extreme training, and that we bring so much expertise and experience in our own care to doing a good job.
Ruth, it seems like the topics that you touch on are always so timely and so relevant, and they're really capturing the sense of the whole community of ophthalmology. Just like you alluded to, everyone's saying, oh yeah, me too. I have that exact same experience, and we wouldn't have talked about it unless you had written about it. I'd love to know, what is your process for coming up with these editorials, for writing them? How did you become such an amazing writer? Or is that a gift you've always had? It's almost like this extra creative. You're an artist of sorts. I mean, you're an author, basically. So tell us about the process, because it's amazing.
Well, a couple things. First of all, I've gotten better as I go. So maybe the most important thing I have is a deadline. So, these deadlines force you to sit down and spend, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours researching and thinking about a topic. But the other thing I do is I listen. So when I go to meetings, I'm listening to the hallway conversations. I'm listening to the conversations over dinner. I'm listening to what people say from the podium, and that's where I get all my ideas. And then the other thing is, you guys tell me what to write about. So someone will send me an email or a text and say, hey, have you ever thought about, something? And sometimes they're the best ideas of all. So I think it's really being in the middle of a community and caring about it and paying attention to its people and its issues and, what's important to us.
It's fantastic. Do you keep a list in your phone? Do you have a physical journal that you write them down in?
I used to. So when I first started this job, I was terrified that, the deadline would come and I would have nothing to say. And so I kept a folder with my ideas. But now it's so much more organic, and I usually have 2 or 3 things I'm working on at once. So it's gotten easier, and I have more ideas as time goes.
I love that. I really like hearing about the process and how you actually bring it to fruition. So thank you. That's terrific.
Let's transition to the other topic.
Yes.
So you have obviously leadership experience from an AAO perspective in these, as you're sharing at INET, but in your local community at the Wheaton Eye Clinic, well respected in being a large multi-center established private practice in the Chicago area. You were the president of that for that period of time. And from that role, I understand that you have had, as most practices that probably do these days, pressures from private equity or opportunity in private equity. So we thought you would be a perfect individual to just share your perspective, not necessarily in your leadership, but the whole group there. What is the current landscape of private practice ownership and the opportunity in private practice or in private equity for individuals? Frame that for the conversation, and then let's hear about the Wheaton story after that.
Okay, well, our group is fiercely independent, and we believe that being physician-led and physician-owned gives us the opportunity to, and the responsibility to create our own values, to create our own culture, to create our own level of expertise, medical quality that we're delivering, and we think we can do it better than anyone. Now, the flip side of that is that we have to do the work. So our physicians, we tend to draw physicians who are willing to put in the extra work to own their own business. And that, of course, has been a process. But I think the most important thing I would say is that I think private practice is an amazing way to deliver high quality, efficient, compassionate eye care. And one of the things I'd love to do is help empower other people to build the kinds of practice that we've built.
So in the landscape across the United States, and the AAO, probably has data on this. For me, sitting in an academic role, I am out of touch with how much in a typical state private equity has a footprint in ownership. Is there any numbers over, compared to 30 years ago when everybody that wasn't in an institutional setting owned their practices? What's the balance now? Any data on that you're aware of?
There is data, and I don't have it at the
Small,
forefront.
medium, large?
Yeah, well, it depends on the region. So there are certain regions
Sure.
that are much more heavily private equity owned, and then regions where it's less common. But one thing I have noticed is, even in Illinois, in the Midwest, is that private equity continues to be interested in ophthalmology, and not just large groups, but they're interested in acquired medium and smaller groups as well. So it's a very active space. It's a very active space still.
I think, when we're counseling our residents who are looking at jobs and going out into private practice and finding a practice that's home for them, if it's already PE owned and run, then in a sense you can kind of know what you're getting into. You can know what the culture is like, what the rules are, what the boundaries are going to be. I think the scary part and the unknown is that you can sign on to join a practice that then becomes acquired by PE after. And then, just like you said, Ruth, then the physicians aren't running it. They're not making the rules anymore. They're not setting the goals or the standards or anything, the overhead or what everyone has collectively decided is in the best interest of the practice and the patients. So what are the ways that practices can navigate deciding if they're going into PE? What did you guys think about to make that decision? And then how have you resisted and maintained the physician leadership?
Yeah, well, I think there are two kind of questions embedded in your comments, and one is how can someone joining a practice protect themselves if the possibility that it might sell to PE. One thing we do is when we're interviewing people, or even before we're interviewing, we make it very clear. This is our strategy. This is where we're going. We're really not interested in PE. We can't promise it'll never happen, but we can promise you there are no conversations going on. And, in the short term, that's certainly not something that's going to happen. And here's why we don't think it'll ever happen. But I think for other residents, there are some there is some language that you can put into a contract to protect yourself. But really, ultimately, the best advice I have for residents is you're going to spend so much time at your practice and surround yourself with people. You want to be in a group, whether it's private equity owned or not. You want to be around people and in a practice where your own personal core values and the core values of the practice match, that they align. Because this is your life. Your life is at work, just like your life is at home. Mm-hmm. And you got to be around people you respect and you like. And I think that's actually more important than whether it's private equity owned or not.
That makes sense.
That's you shared with us that your practice went through an option for merging with the hospital even before the private equity opportunity came up. Were those two opportunities viewed similarly by your private practice? In terms of an outside entity being interested in you, that you wanted to be independent and be able to be your own family, or are those two opportunities different in your mind in terms of the risks and or benefits?
Very similar. In fact, I think maybe one of the most fortuitous things that happened to us was that the hospital wanted to buy us. And this was, I forget the exact time, but it was around 2010, 2011. So before the private equity space was active. And the CEO of the hospital approached me and he said, at that time, the nonprofit hospital's profit was about $200 million a year. And he said, I have to reinvest, my quote unquote profit. And, and here's how I want to do it. So they were trying to create, a health system with all the subspecialties. So I went back to the group. I put together a white paper and went back to the group and mapped out as best as we could guess what life would be like under the hospital based on, what we were told and what we, the numbers that were being tossed around. And then what it would look like to be independent and what were the issues we needed to address and solve. And we spent hours going over this together, and then we voted because it wasn't my decision. I felt like it wasn't the senior partner's decision. This was a decision that everyone would make together. And so the group decided to stay independent. And then and by the way, it was an overwhelming vote, overwhelmingly united. So then the things that we'd put in the white paper, we set about accomplishing them. And it was really, the process is still ongoing, but it took us almost a decade to do everything we needed to do on that white paper. And so when private equity came along, later, and we were approached aggressively by many people and continue to be, we had already addressed the reasons that people sell to private equity. So we went through the process again and re-asked, do you want to sell this place? And it's a big operation, and the partnership vigorously said, no, we want to keep this to ourselves. So that's the strategy we're on, and I can share kind of the big problems that not problems, they're issues, the big issues that you have to address if you want to keep a practice independent.
Yeah, I would love to know the challenges of running a practice and what are the biggest issues today in private practice, because we're so shielded from it in academics, but I'd love to know that.
Well, there are basically three things that groups have to commit to working on and solving. There are three problems that private equity will solve for you. Mm-hmm. And if you want to stay independent, you have to address them yourselves. And the first one is transfer of equity. So if you have a practice, our practice is 85 years old. So over time, we've developed a lot of equity. And so when people retire, you have to pass that ownership on to younger people. And how do you do that? The second thing is that, at least in today's environment, a healthy practice is probably growing, especially with decreasing reimbursements. So you need a strategic growth model, and you have to be able to fund that strategic growth. So how do you have the money to grow your practice? And then the third thing is governance and management. You need a really good governance infrastructure, and you need people who are willing to do the work of running the business. So all of those three things private equity will happily do for you, but we addressed each of those issues. And I think the most acute one, at least 15 years ago, was addressing transfer of equity. How do you buy out your senior partners who, a small number of people at that time owned, most of the assets? How do you transfer that to your younger people? And we've done that so beautifully that we're so broadly owned now. And one of the things I'm most proud of is, that it's a very equitable ownership between men and women. It's a half women-owned practice, and I love that.
I love that. And I could see where that would be a tricky situation, because I could see where you have a generation of physicians who have built the practice, put years and years and blood, sweat, and tears into it, and they own, let's say, 60, 70, 80% of the practice, but now they're getting older and they're doing maybe 20% of the work, where you have the new young workforce who's doing 80% of the work but only own 20% of the practice. So how do you balance that? And I think that's the common problem that you're talking about, right?
Yes. And, it's a lot cultural. So when we bring people in, we say, don't go buy a big fancy house. Don't go buy a brand new car. Come and work super, super hard, and save and start buying into our real estate, start buying into our surgery center, because, then this is yours. And we really promote that when we're interviewing, and people come in and they get, we tend to hire the people who get it. We also tell them they're going to work really hard, and we tell them that this is going to be your home. So there's so much buy-in and so much pride, and also a lot of agency. So, there's tons of flexibility among our physicians in how much they work and how much vacation they take. And we really honor the arc of someone's career, which changes over time. What you want to do when you're 35 isn't the same amount of work you want to do when you're 65. Or, we allow people to expand and contract their careers as it fits their lifestyle. And what we get are people who are all in, and they're in emotionally, they're in culturally, they're in as a family, and they're in financially too, because they've bought into the assets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a sign of a well-run organization on the leadership side. One of my dear friends, Michael Kipp, has the current leadership mantle for the Wheaton Eye Clinic now, and I've always been struck with he's such a humble perspective and wise perspective on leadership, but he carries with great honor and a sense of duty. And I think that's the part that I think in a lot of practices, even in academics, it's not always easy to get people into administrative roles and leadership roles. But as you just shared, the more that an individual feels part of the family, buy-in, and that ownership, it probably leads to an easier process of getting people's hands raised for, leadership and administrative roles. So culture, when the culture works, the leadership works.
Well, one thing too, Ruth. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'm always thinking about everything from a young ophthalmologist standpoint and how we advise our residents. And I think when you talk about physician leadership and running your practice, it seems really daunting to young ophthalmologists. Like, I don't know anything about business. I didn't train for this. I don't know how to manage a P&L and whatever. And so the way that you encourage your ophthalmologists to dive in and be the owners and manage their business and run a business, I think that's terrific and something that we should encourage more in our young ophthalmologists.
Absolutely. And you don't learn it overnight, and you don't do it alone. And we have really good executive management also, and they come alongside and give us data, and it's very team. But I'm so glad you mentioned Mike Kipp, for those of you who know him, because he's absolutely, the example of the kind of people we want running medicine. he's a wholehearted person. He's here because he cares so much. He's really good. He's very even and sensible. And, that's, I wish we had a million Mike Kipps, but you know what? We do. They're out there. And, I'm sure Mike or the two of you or me, when we were young ophthalmologists, we never imagined we'd have these jobs. I mean, I can't even believe it. But if you give so much and learn along the way and you have mentors, really anybody can learn this. It's not that hard.
As you say that, you're positioned in a location that certainly has training programs around you. Certainly here at Mayo, I think our residency program is phenomenal, in large part thanks to the person next to me helping to lead it. But a lot of programs don't necessarily get their residents into private practice observer roles. I know I've heard about it in different settings, but to me, it's still the minority. Is there?
Sure.
I'll ask you from a program perspective: are you seeing a greater buy-in for carving out opportunities for residents to get private practice exposure?
I think the academy does a really good job of introducing trainees to what private practice life looks like. But I think in academics, every single medical student says, I want to go into academics. And most residents, at least for the first few years, say, I want to go into academics. And then you look at the data and about 80% of us do private practice. And so they don't align. It's like, well, you say that, but you're probably going to go to private practice. And I think academy is leading the way, but our residencies could certainly do better introducing trainees to business models.
We give them international rotation opportunities. We give them certainly subspecialty. I think it's an interesting priority to with the academy support and creative models of giving them private practice and in particular administrative leadership opportunities to figure out how to grow into these roles.
But I would also say the time to learn, the business of it, even coding isn't when you're a resident. It's in that first, 10 years out.
Yeah.
Because honestly, when you're a resident, you have so much medicine to learn. And, academic programs are structured to teach that content. In private practice, we're not set up. We don't have structures for the infrastructure for doing it. So I love the idea. And I love the idea of introducing people to private practice, but I really do think residency program isn't the place to teach the business and the leadership. Well, you can start leadership skills, but,
right, but not the business.
Probably later. Some of the state societies, Pennsylvania, for example, the Pennsylvania State Society is doing a terrific job on putting together leadership and management courses for people in the beginning years of practice. And the academy has great content too. So I think there's a real opportunity for growing that. And Andrea, you're probably growing that in ways I don't even know about, but that's when I think it's the most important time. Or even mid-career. Some people don't have time that first 10 years. But mid-career, sometimes people wake up and go, wow, maybe I could be on the finance committee, or maybe I am interested in rewriting the bylaws or whatever, it is.
That's such a beautiful thing about medicine is that there's so much, and you can have all these different phases to your career. You can be research heavy or business heavy or admin heavy or advocacy heavy, or just take a step back and see patients and do surgery as if that wasn't enough. There's so many different things to enrich our lives. So I love that. And there can be seasons.
You just had to hang around someone as energetic as Andrea, that'll someone say, can you do a podcast with me? And my first response was, what? And here we are.
Here we are, learning
Here
so much.
You said yes, Andrea.
Of course, absolutely.
And I'm sure
Sophie
you learned a
Backery
lot.
came and said, you're going to do a podcast. Said, okay, only if Eric does it with me.
There we go.
That's great.
Well, Ruth,
Real great.
you are always a joy as a guest. It is just
thank
enjoyable
you.
to have you here and unpack parts of your life, hear your wisdom, see your joy. Thank you.
Thank you
thank
for all of
you.
this. We learned so much as always.
Well, I learned from talking to you, so wonderful.
You can find all episodes of the Mayo Clinic Ophthalmology Podcast on our website.
Thank you for listening, and we definitely look forward to sharing more